Welcome back to another Pen Talk. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for following me as I explore my wide world of vintage fountain pens. I have a lot. I don't count. They're spread out pretty much in a number of different places. Most of them in my pen room, but not all. I do have some stored in boxes that I go through periodically when I want to look for something in particular. But this pen captured my attention. So I looked at it, did some research, was quite surprised about what I found, and felt it was worth sharing with you. So we're going to explore this pen, talk a little bit about its history, as much as I can find, ink it up, and write with it. Mr. Crab winks at you. So what intrigued me first about this pen was it looks like it could be Urushi over top of hard rubber or ebonite. And I still think that's the case. The other thing that's interesting is it has a blind cap. And if you unscrew it and pull it out, you'll see what appears to be a piston. What kind of piston, we'll see. And it does line up fairly well, which is always a nice feature. The cap band is engraved with what it looks like a 14K, which is also interesting. You know, it's a very classic design, a timeless design in my view. Also a very somewhat minimalistic design, but with a lot of character to it. It unscrews relatively well. And we see a 14-karat gold nib. This says steady on it, which is the only clue I have as to what this pen might be. I did clean it up a little bit. Didn't require a lot of cleanup. If we unscrew the section, and it takes a lot of turns because, as you would suspect, this is an eyedropper pen, and that's a shutoff valve. Nice ebonite feed. Definitely an ebonite pen. So let's take a look at its history and then see how that interesting 14-karat nib writes. Stay tuned. This pen feels light. It fits the hand very nicely. The section is short, but it's a good diameter. The threads are not sharp at all. You can hold it anywhere you want. That barrel is a pretty good diameter too. We'll give you that measurements. Not something I would do on a regular basis, but there are some people who must post a pen, and it does post. It makes for a long pen. It back weights it a little bit, but it is doable. So this pen requires a lot of work to it before it will become a fully functional pen. I did put some Noodler's 54th Massachusetts in here because I figured that would be the appropriate ink. The seal in the back here is gone, so that would need to be replaced because ink from inside the barrel leaks out through this blind cap. But hopefully we got some ink in the nib and we can show you how this nib writes. So this is definitely has that vintage feel to it. It's soft. It spreads with hardly any effort whatsoever. It's extremely wet. Also indicative of a vintage nib like this. You know, after this review, I'm going to empty it out, clean it out, and put it away and consider whether it's worth restoring. For the nib, it certainly is, and it is ergonomic very nice. My research on this pen indicates it was probably made in the mid-50s in Japan. I don't find any markings that could identify the Urushi artist that did this. That style of these stripes might be something that others might recognize. If you do, let me know. You can see there's a little bit of red that shows underneath of the black. So it's definitely some type of Urushi style. But what really makes this pen a special pen is the nib. This nib, as far as I know, was made by Kabutogi Jinjiro, as well as I can pronounce it. That little circle there with the squiggly line, I think, is his symbol. He's known for making nibs and is quite popular for the nibs that he's made. That 4-digit number beneath that is the JIS symbol, Japanese Industrial Standards, which was used to establish that was a 14-karat gold nib. And I think this nib writes extremely well. It has a little bit of a character to it in that grind, kind of like a fine oblique. Definitely wide wings, kind of like a platinum style. So that's my analysis, and that's my findings from my internet searches. So somebody might ask, what is this pen worth? And when anybody asks that, my first response is whatever someone's willing to pay. These pens can be very expensive. I don't think, unless someone doesn't know what they are, they're not going to be sold at a low price. How did this pen come into my possession? That is a very good question, which I do not have a answer for. I could have bought this during my travels in Japan. I did buy pens in Japan. But I think most likely this was picked up, could have been on Canal Street. I did a lot of walking up and down Canal Street in the 70s and 80s and bought a few pens during that. And I went to many flea markets in New York City and bought a lot of pens. This could have been acquired there, but I never kept a log of what I bought when, and doesn't really concern me right now. I'm just glad I have the pen in my possession. The other thing it's always good to do is explore inside the cap. There's a phenomenal amount of threading in there. And it's going to be hard to see down at the very bottom. But it's kind of rough there at the end where that finial is attached. And the clip does move back and forth, and you can see some damage that the edge of that clip has done to the coating on the cap. Opus 88s are considered to be a pen paying homage to the Japanese eyedropper pens, which were popular for a fairly long period of time. You know, this has the shutoff valve, the rod that comes down, and it's activated by this piston at the end. If you unscrew it, it takes a lot of turns. You can pull it out, and there's that rod. And this has very good seals in it because there's no ink on that rod. And as you can see, the pen is fairly full of ink. I wouldn't push this rod in with the pen nib down. I'd always push it in with the pen nib up because it will squirt out a little bit of ink, a la 355. So that's a modern eyedropper pen done in the style of the Japanese eyedroppers. Watching closely on this nib, you might say, those tines are misaligned, you should realign them. But they don't affect the writing. This nib is so soft that when you touch it to paper, those two nibs just line up and it doesn't interfere, and it really doesn't, you don't feel any scratchiness from it. So I'm fine with that. And when I've tried to align a nib I broke the tipping material off, so I tend not to play around that much with vintage nibs. So thank you for watching. Hopefully you've enjoyed this look at a pen that you may not have ever known about. I certainly didn't until I did some research, and that was because I had this pen in my possession. So I hope all of you are safe, healthy, and happy, enjoying life, enjoying your pens, enjoying putting ink on paper. This is the end of this video, and we're going to say bye until the next video. It is a nice nib.